Visual aids. All of you are going to be presenting speeches in the class that are going to require some type of visual representation. And we want visual representation. It helps us to support our ideas. It helps make our ideas come to life and makes them interesting. It helps our audience to retain the information that they are getting. So let's think about those three things one more time. What did we say? It is flat out, enter, right? Who doesn't love seeing a visual aid? It's always so fun for an audience. It gets you excited, engaged. It also helps to clarify. What does clarify mean? Make clear, absolutely. If I say the sandy beaches, the large trees, the blue water, what comes to your mind?
A beach.
What beach?
Fire.
Okay, good. And as we say, you said
I said fire.
Playa Vista or Playa del Rey. You said the Bahamas. Does the sand and the water in Playa del Rey by the Hyperion plant and the Bahamas water look the same? Do those beaches look the same? So when I use that language and I want to make this idea come to life to my audience, it's imperative that I could clarify exactly what I'm talking about if I want to give you a reference point, because your blue is different than your blue. And the trees that we may all be seeing when I say trees is only as clear as it is in your frame of reference. What do you know about? What do you not know about? The same thing happens with sandy beaches. Is it dark? Is it black sand? Is it all rocks? Is it white? Who knows? Those are all different types, but if you haven't experienced it before, we can't assume all of our audience is on the same page. So thus, it can clarify. Other things that it can help to clarify are things like statistical trends. Numbers are very hard to explain, so oftentimes using a visual aid can help to explain that a bit more so that we can see what this comparison actually means. But also, it can be utilized as a very effective supporting material. A visual aid can be or serve as an example or a testimony or perchance some types of statistics. All of these things can help aid in the development of our speech. When it comes time for persuasion, how often are visual representations used without any words at all to help guide you to an idea, to help you to take action on a movement, or even to shift your understanding of an idea, or help you to understand somebody's beliefs a little bit further? Yeah, without words, what do? We use a visual aid, and a visual aid can be very effective in that way, that I can put up a picture of we'll get into ethics when we talk next time, and we'll get into the use of ineffective pathos, that ineffective emotional appeal. But if you think about how often, if they're talking about pet or animal rights, an easy vehicle to get people to take action or to be moved emotionally is to show you what types of animals. Happy animals running around? No, what do? They show you abused animals and they show you sad animals, etc. This can be a way, without having to make any clear argument, a way for you to draw to a change or to a behavior, etc. So it's all very important to help to clarify and to know that, and also helps the idea of entertainment. But what was the last thing that I said that it did? It helps your audience to? Nope, that'll be clarified. Ends with M. Remember. Yeah, absolutely. Remember. It helps them to retain the information that you are speaking about. We can go back and we can see it. Imagine if you were watching a television cooking show and the individual chef who was cooking was simply telling you, you'll get the basil, you'll get the star fruit, you'll get the red pepper flakes, you'll put it in a bowl, and they just told you and they didn't what? Show you. Oftentimes when we're completing a recipe, we want to look at, like, is this what it's supposed to look like right now? Is it not? If we're putting together a model, if you will. I don't know, I put together a lot of toys. Put together a car recently for Dylan. Those plastic cars that you can push around. It's like, oh gosh, so I have to get out my directions and I look at 17 different things that I need and I'm watching the parts go by, because if it was just reading it to me and using terminology or language that I'm not very familiar with, that car would have never gotten built. But I had a backup. What did I have? A visual aid, right? And it helps me to remind me and to retain and to clarify. And also it's fun to look at, so it's entertaining. If your visual aid does not fulfill one or all of the criteria, don't use it. It doesn't have a purpose. I had a student who came in one time, put up a flag of Cuba, gave his speech on Cuba, then sat down. What did this flag do? Nothing. He never referred to it. He never talked about it. He hung it up, so what did we all just stare at the whole time?
The flag.
The flag. When's he going to get to the flag? What's happening with the flag? Flag, flag. The visual aid has a purpose. It's there to aid in the development of your speech. And that is why we are going to use it. So in your informative and your persuasive speeches, you will need a visual aid. For this photograph speech, you will also need a visual aid. If you're in my persuasion class, your speeches are going to need a visual aid, some type of artifact. Let us see what types of visual aids we can use beyond the photograph or the artifact, etc., or this would be some type of artifact. And all of these rules, as in all of the things that I do in this class, are not specific to simply this class alone. These are guidelines and requirements that will work whether you're delivering to a group of 20 or you're delivering to a group of 200. Know that you can take these skills about visual aids, and every single time it will work and it will be effective should we follow them. The bottom part here, do you have a question?
No.
The bottom part here, the numbers 1 through 7, are guidelines for presenting visual aids. When you are evaluated in your speech about the use of visual aids, those 7 things are what you are graded on. Why are you graded on them? Because those are the things that are going to make these visual aids effective instead of distracting and deterring from the content of your speech. That make sense? Awesome. All right, let's talk a bit about the types of visual aids that we can use. You've probably seen these all before. It's no new thing to you, but let's go through them so that you can, of course, start to think, well, what types of visual aids would I use, or how would I do this, etc. The first thing that we have on this sheet of paper here, if you can see, is an object. An object is anything that you can touch, something that is tangible. Absolutely. I'm giving you a speech on skiing. How many of you have been skiing before? By show of hands. 2 of you. 3 of you. Fantastic. Your audience now doesn't have the same kind of knowledge that you have. And although we may assume, well, everybody knows about skiing, everybody's done it, I've never skied before in my life. My parents weren't snow people. I only saw falling snow for the first time when I moved to New York at like 27 for the winter, so I don't know about this idea of snow skiing. So let's say that my main points are the equipment needed and the slopes you'll want to understand. What types of objects could I use for my first main point? If it's the equipment needed, get out. Skis pole. Skis. What else do you use? Goggles, like the ones that I go swimming with? No, exactly. And so we bring in these objects for our audience to see so that they can get a tangible idea of what it looks like. So feel free to bring in a myriad of objects to explain or to support the idea. If you're doing your photograph speech and you want to bring in an artifact, an actual object, you can. I had a student at LMU one year who was very scared of the chupacabra. This was his thing growing up in his family. He was frightened of it. And what he had was a small artifact that he carried everywhere with him that he said would keep the bad spirits, juju, whatever, away. What did he do? He brought in that artifact with him to show us and to describe what this artifact was and how it kept the spirits away. if you will.
Instead of a photo, you use the
Yeah, so the object, absolutely. The great news about the technology in our classroom as well, and we'll go over some of the technology for this classroom, but you have a document camera. What that means is that you can put anything underneath that document camera that you would want, and it will reflect onto the screen behind us. Let me show you a quick example of this document camera usage, if you will. And I have made you all a video on how to use the technology in this classroom that you can look at and review. So all I have to do is put it underneath here. Here's the piece of paper, super easy. Oh look, it's an eraser. Oh look, it's the top of the eraser. Oh look, it's my cell phone. Never, ever, we'll talk about that. Oh, here, I want to show you this pen. It's very important, right? And I can zoom in and I can zoom out, so I can really put anything on this that I want to. Yeah? So any type of object that you feel you want to bring in, if you have that tangible, you can very much use it. What's the next visual aid on there?
models.
Models! So you can bring in Gigi Hadid?
I wish.
Okay, good. Tyra Banks for any of you other ones? No, you can bring in a model. So in fact, sure, we can talk about that. But let's talk about what models actually are. What are they? Oh, good. Let's look at the description. I'll just read it for you. You could also read it. Anything it's built to, something that is built to scale. Absolutely. I'm going to do my speech on the Eiffel Tower. Should I bring it in? I can't, but I could bring in a smaller version of it and a model of it. I'm going to bring in or talk to you about the Titanic. Can't bring it in. Gotta narrow it down. I had a student one semester at Moore Park College where I teach, and she was an architecture major, and she had built an entire model of Alcatraz. It was super, super fun. But what she did in her speech was brought in that model, and then she described Alcatraz for us with using the model and taking us on a journey through the rock, if you will. So it was a really fun way for us to see and get involved and be engaged with that. So yes, you can use a model, but we'll get down to that when we're talking about like the speaker, if you will. Then we have photographs. Photographs obviously are a great use of clarification. Like I said, you can find photographs anywhere. Where can you find photographs? What? Google! These images, right? So we can use them. We can find them on the internet. We can also find them in these things called books or magazines. Or we can also find photographs lying around at our, okay, great. Or, oh gosh, I don't have a hard copy. I only have it online. So I only have it on my Instagram or I only have it on my Facebook. Fantastic. You can utilize all these different types of photographs, but they are a representation, if you will, of what we're trying to speak about. So bring in photographs if that's how you would like to clarify your ideas. Drawings, if you are an excellent artiste and you would like to draw for us, feel free to do so. The only thing that I do not encourage you to draw are charts and graphs. One, it takes a long time, and two, the distribution doesn't always easily transfer over. Oftentimes our circles and our shading is a bit off, and so that could skew the descriptions that we're trying to explain. But if you are an excellent artist and you want to bring in something that you've drawn for perchance your photograph, speech, or maybe it's easier for you to draw a representation of a scenario you're trying to talk about for persuasive speech, you can draw your own comic or something, feel free to do so. If you're doing charts and graphs, where's a great way to do those? Where can you do those?
Computer?
Oh my gosh, yes. Scream it from the rooftop.
Computer!
Like, what kind of program would you make a chart or a graph?
PowerPoint.
A PowerPoint? Excel? They do it all for you. All you have to do is put in the distribution and they'll make it. I would venture to say there's probably a website that's like makeyourowngraph.com. You can upload it and do something there. So feel free to make it inside those programs. So what are graphs and charts specifically? Graphs and charts are something that is used to show what? Data, but what kind of data? Typically, both numeric and So both qualitative and quantitative, if you will, so both numbers and language can be identified in charts and graphs. Charts are typically qualitative. It will have all the wording or the language. Let's say I wanted to list, any of you have a behavior chart when you were younger? Or you remember in school they would do a behavior chart? Right? It would have all of your names on it. And then next it would be like, talking, homework, and you get like a star if you, or a sad face, something like that. That's a chart. It has a lot of information in it, usually a large chunks of information that you want to put in, but you want to show the comparison of something. We'll also go over, when it comes time for persuasion, some type of graphs, both line graphs, bar graphs, and pie graphs, so fun, slices of distribution. Persuasive speech oftentimes, or an informative speech, as well as your photograph speech, aren't going to be filled with graphs and charts. Why? Because when we use numerical data, or we use comparisons, or we're trying to show distribution purposes, it's usually for the point of getting our audience to, what? To see it for the purpose of? Yeah, so we can definitely retain the information and get it, but when we use graphs and charts as a supporting material, we typically use it in persuasion, because numbers are things that people view as true, starts with a, ends with an ax, facts. And a great way to show numbers is through graphs and charts, because individuals don't often grasp when you use large numbers at a time. So a great way to do that, because if I'm showing you that 4 out of 5 people do it, or this is the distribution of wealth that is used in the world, I can give you a big number, but what does that mean? Oh, it's this much. That's crazy town. The other day I saw a pie graph on distribution of spending in the United States. It was like this huge graph, and it totally put into perspective for me, because all of our talk or our dialogue was like so, and then everything else was like this. And there was this 2% of food, if you will, and then this was all defense. And it was like, this is the part that everybody's complaining about and saying that our public service and assistance is sucking our government dry of money. Yeah, who's looking at this? But we can, if we create the rhetoric about this, and that's the only thing that you hear a message about, then obviously you're going to think that that is actually this, right? Fascinating. The graph really opened up my eyes. Like, oh, yeah, that's helpful. Anyway. So we can talk about charts and graphs and that a little bit later. Audio and video are also fine for you to use in this classroom. You can pull it up either on the computer, of course making sure that your volume and everything is working. You can also play it from a device like your cellular phone, because nowadays those are great, but if you wanted to bring in speakers to make it louder, that would be also effective to do. But in regards to audio and video, I've seen speeches where people take 5 minutes of their speech and play a video, and you're like, well, now what's the purpose of you? The video's there, right? Again, the video should be a supporting material or something to help clarify what you're talking about. So the rule of thumb is that we would use about 30 seconds of a audio or visual for a speech of 5 to 7 minutes. If you are doing a speech of 2 to 3 minutes, which all of you will be for both your photograph speech and for the persuasion class for your This is Rhetoric speech, I would suggest using only around 15 seconds of that clip to narrow your time. And why is this? What happens when somebody shows a video?
People ask questions.
Ooh, maybe they ask questions. Okay, good. But it what? It can. It definitely shifts the mood, right? It shifts the mood of what we were speaking about. People can become very involved in the video and then lose track of you. We want to make the focus about you and the content and make sure that that is the supporting character, not the lead character, which you are. So watch for the videos of being too long or taking up too much of your space and time. If you get your video from somewhere, if you get your photograph from somewhere, for example, for those of you in the persuasion class who are doing the 2 to 3 minute speeches, or the public speaking classes for the photograph speech, because it's a 2 to 3 minute speech, in this case, and you keep the visual aid up the entire time because that's what the speech is about, I would encourage you to tell us where that photo came from, if it's not you, inside the reveal topic portion of the speech. Does that make sense? So right after that attention getter, you'll reveal the topic, you'll tell us what you're talking about today, and then you'll give us some background about it and giving credit where credit is deserved, the artifact that you have gotten. So I got this, I got this off of Google Images, is also suffice if you can't find it, or Getty Images, or this was taken from the website Artgrist, or however you want to say it. Does that make sense to you? In the case of your informative speeches, as well as your persuasive speeches, when they are built out a bit, when you are giving a photograph or taking it from somewhere else, or a video, etc., you will be using multiple visual aids, perchance, in your speech, and in that case, you do not have to tell us the visual aids up front and where you're getting them, because that would be weird. It would be like revealing all of your visual aids before you even talk to them. So in turn, what you'll do is right before you show your visual aid, you can talk to us about where it came from and give credit where credit is due. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. Let's move forward. Multimedia presentations. We don't use PowerPoint in this class. I don't allow any of my classes to use PowerPoint in its traditional format. You can utilize a PowerPoint, in particular with your informative and your persuasive speeches, where you have a lot of different visual aids to show. It's a wonderful platform for going in between visual aids, if you will, but you do not want to have every single thing that you are going to say up in a PowerPoint formation while you are talking. Why is that? Absolutely. Again, let you be the starring person of the show. I have a great book. It's called Real Leaders Don't Use PowerPoint. Right? We know how to speak, and we know how to keep an audience engaged, and we know how to listen, and we know how to connect with them, that we don't need something like this. The problem with PowerPoint is people sit there and do this also. If you're not reading, who else is reading? The speaker. You just sit there and you read the content. It's like, no, you could have just uploaded it. Why do I even need to be here today? Do you feel like that sometimes? Yes. Why am I even here in class if you're going to do this? Right? So we don't want that to take away from us. But in the case of multimedia, if you wanted to upload something, again, into PowerPoint, like my first slide is the picture that I'm going to use, and my second slide is a video, and the third slide is another picture, that is fine because it's a good platform to do so. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay, good. Let's talk about the speaker. You also can be an amazing visual aid, if you will. When have you seen a person be their own visual aid? Anybody ever been to an exercise class in their life?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good. So, for example, what does this do? What does an exercise class?
They show you how to do specific movements.
Right? So it's like going like this. No, make sure that you're squared off and your leg is pointing towards the back and your trunk is up and your butt's tucked up, right? They do the whole thing to make sure that you understand. Otherwise, I'd be like, this is so easy. Clearly I'm getting better. But in that case, they are themselves their visual aids. So in many times, if we're talking about something like yoga or exercise, perchance you're talking about boxing, dancing, all of these, you could be your own visual aid, especially when we think about how we use the body. I did have a student one semester. It was super fun. She was a tap dancer, and I used to teach in this classroom where there was a big desk in the front, like so, but bigger. And so what she did is she brought in a board, she put it on top, and she brought a friend with her. And they started out their introduction and their attention getter by doing a tap. Right? And she got down and she gave us a little bit of background that she's going to be talking about tap. And then when she was saying, I'm going to show you, or I'll tell you about the moves, what she did is she had her friend stand back up on that table, and she was like, this is called the flap. I can use words to describe it, but if you're not privy to what a flap means, or shuffling back and forth, you need to know it. She was able to have that friend come, right, and do the move for her so that you knew what it was whilst they were doing it. So remember that you can always use yourself as a visual aid. Magicians, they're their own visual aid, yeah? Okay. So our one student I had when I used to do process speeches, she did how to do cornrows in your hair. So she had somebody in the audience, and then she had showed us the process of doing it. Fascinating. All good stuff. Does this make sense about how you can use yourself, utilize another? Objects, photographs, charts, graphs, models. Sky's the limit to make us entertained or clarify your information, or perchance even get us to retain something. But if it doesn't fulfill that, should you use it? That's right, you should not. Okay, great. Good job, everybody. Let us continue, shall we? Let us go on with the guidelines for visual aids. And these are helpful hints that will prepare you. There is no, you know what I didn't talk about? What kind of visual aids can I use? And then let me tell you about the one thing that you should never use. And maybe an example. These are what last ones. When you think about visual aids, we typically think back to our time in high school. What types of visual aids did you use in high school? I had to do a science report. I did a history project. Poster boards. Can I talk to you about how much time poster boards take out of you developing content? So much, because you're worried about, you have what? All the space you have to fill, you're putting on all the what? Pictures, you're putting in all the words and all the information. This is not a science fair, people. There is no need for a poster board. Poster board will defeat every single one of the guidelines that you see coming up, and also it will defeat you because you will waste so much time creating that poster board with the glitter and the color and the pictures and the content that you won't even have time to write your outline. So throw that out of the way. We do not want poster boards in this classroom. Let's go over for some of these guidelines. The first thing that you should do is prepare your visual aids in advance. This is going to help you, of course, in regards to your planning. This will help you to know what you are going to use. So as you are writing the main points of your speech for the informative and for the persuasive, in this case, I would encourage all of you to go through, as you're going through these main points, and think about where are areas where my audience may be a little bit confused? Where does my audience know about this information? Did I see something cool that I want to show the audience in my research? Whilst you are writing this speech, obtain and start to put together your visual aids. Don't wait until after. You also will go back and be like, where was that again? Make sure the next thing is to keep your visual aids simple. They, again, are there to help you. I had a student one semester who was a barista. Who else is a barista in here? Okay, right, we were talking about that. Baristas. And she wanted to show us how to make a mocha frappuccino. How many ingredients do we need? And apparati and devices. I mean, it was the coffee machine. It's the blender she's bringing in. She's got 18 cups of it. She's got a whole ice chest. It was a mess. Then one of the parts didn't work, so it kept going. It was horrible. Also, what's everybody looking at the whole time? All that visual aids, and there's so much stuff, right? We're looking at all that stuff. It is important that you keep it simple. Keep it simple for the audience and keep it simple for yourself. What? It was a hot mess. It was my first semester of teaching also, by the way, so I didn't know that it was, like, I really didn't know to put the parameters on things like that. Also why a process speech, it just doesn't go well. We know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but what does it require? A lot of setup and a lot of time. Sadly, in these times of crowded classes, there's no time for it. The next one is to make sure that your visual aids are large enough. Can everybody see what is written on this piece of paper? No. The second that the audience can't see what we're talking about, what do they stop doing? Paying attention. There's no need. If you're not making this large enough for me to see, then what am I looking at? Why are you trying to explain it to me? So what should I do? I should? Absolutely. I can use the projector, or perchance I can use the computer. And in that way, it will be reflected large enough for the entire audience to see, and we aren't leaving anybody out. I put on a transparency sheet, but we're lucky that we have this technology in this classroom, so you don't have to worry about the idea of a transparency person. The other thing, we want to make sure that we are using fonts that are easy to read. If I am putting text up on the screen, if I am ever utilizing a PowerPoint, there are rules to go by in regards to font. Let's look. If you are going to do titles, they are always 36 inches, and if for font, it's going to be 28. Does that make sense? So the title is 36, and the font is 28. That's large enough for the average individual to see. The most important thing, though, is that we use a font that is also clear. Something like Times New Roman, Tahoma, right, Comic Sans, Helvetica. Nobody wants all Old English up on there. Not everybody can see or understand that. So if you are using something that does have confusing writing, and it hasn't been something that you've created, ensure that when you describe your visual aid, you point out what it is saying. In regards to color, if we move, it says here, number 5, use a limited number of fonts. Use only 1 to 2. If we have like Times New Roman and Courier and Helvetica, it can become confusing. Keep it to 2 fonts only. And the last thing that you want to do is use your color effectively. When we're talking about color, do I want to put yellow on my PowerPoint? No. And I've seen it happen, and it's hard because then your audience can't see it. Absolutely. The other way that we look at color and keep it in the back of our mind for importance is something like a chart of distribution. When we have color, it allows us to see the differentiation in the distribution. But we have to keep in mind that there may be some individuals in our audience who do not see color at times, right? So individuals who are colorblind cannot recognize the differentiation when put together between colors. Wow. It's maybe right there on your paper. Okay, there we go. Absolutely. So the differentiation between the two. So if you are using red here and then green here, it's going to become problematic as these two may blend together for those people. So make sure that you are being inclusive and keeping your access open. Does anybody have any questions about these guidelines for visual aids in advance and the things that I encourage you to do so that you can get a head start and use them effectively? Be prepared for them? Yeah?
So these are guidelines for the next 3 speeches, for the photograph, persuasive, and informative?
Yes. The visual aid part of them. All right. Let's continue. These are the guidelines for presenting visual aids. And this is going to be really important to you. Again, this is what you will be evaluated on when you are giving your, I'm going to put that there, thank you, when you are giving your speech in your presentation. As you know, you can put this and roll it and move it to wherever you need. Because I left it here last time, it was fine because there was no visual aid, correct? Mm-hmm. So you weren't blocking anything. For the purpose of this speech, you may very well want to move the podium over if your choice is to use the podium. Or I would love to encourage all of you to step out of your comfort zone now and start not using the podium. You may like it better. In public speaking, there is a standard or a way that we can use the space without using the podium. But we know that there needs to be a purpose. Have we talked about this already? No. Let me go over it real quick. In regards to movement of a speech, if I was doing this my entire speech, what would you all think?
Weirdo.
Okay, so we go on that judgment.
Joking.
But right, you'd be like, why is she doing that? It's the same thing that when people start to give a speech and they do this. What's the purpose of this? When do you see people who deliver speeches like this?
Motivational.
Motivational speakers, right? Maybe evangelists at church. perchance coaches who are going to get you to go out there and fight. Otherwise, nobody's really doing this because this creates what inside of all of your bodies? Maybe so. Good. So we know what you're doing to the audience. Also, it doesn't have a purpose. And so everything that we do up here should have a purpose. And that's why they came up with this thing called the speaker's triangle. Speaker's triangle or the speaker's pyramid is an effective way for you to utilize this space and make it seem seamless and also give it a purpose, the reason that you're moving. We would never keep our paper up here like so, but you are allowed one page front and back, correct? But you would never leave it open because with the case of apprehension, we know that too much adrenaline sometimes causes people to shake. And then, of course, if you have paper, then what's it going to do? Shake. So, always fold your piece of paper in half, and that gives you an opportunity to grip it like so. How does it work? Well, it works with your introduction and your conclusion at the top of the room. And then it moves you in to your 3 main points, which will work across the floor. And then you'll go back to the top for the conclusion. Where does your speech move naturally? Think about the content of your speech. Where does it move? I would say that if you were in the middle of a sentence and you said, it would more be like that. I mean, help you move, stop you from moving forward. But figuratively, your speech has to move from ma to m. Like, point. Oh my gosh, right? What are those crazy things that move you from one point to another? Oh my goodness, everybody. It would only make sense that we would move on say it with me. There we go, transitions. If we gave we would give our introduction here, if you will, and I'll talk to you about how this photograph signifies friendship, and to do so I'll describe who's in the picture, where we were, and what we were doing. So to begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how this photograph signifies friendship and tell you about who is in the picture. I told you a little bit about who's in the picture, and next I'd like to tell you about where we were so that you can understand how this signifies friendship. And lastly, I'd like to tell you about what we were doing. I don't remember my last main point, so that you can understand how this signifies friendship. Today, I told you a little bit about this and this and this. Also, you can understand how this photograph signifies friendship. Does that make sense? So it was a natural way of doing it. This is not. So exhausted. To have to move is so weird, like for people sometimes. But it's a very easy way for you to also deliver a speech extemporaneously. Because your paper is here, you will look down and you'll talk to us. It's a natural way to use your hands. It's a good way to get out of this position, which encourages this position, which encourages no vocal variety, which encourages no facial expression, right? If we're in our body and we have something to do, like move over here, hey, yeah, right? It gives us something else to do with our content. The first thing that you want to do is always avoid using what we call the whiteboard, and that is behind us, in the middle of your speech specifically. When we use the whiteboard, and you know this from when you're in class, and your teacher turns around to write on the board, what does that allow you to do?
Text.
Text, talk to a friend, start sleeping, etc. So you lose your audience when you break eye contact with them. We know that from simple elements of delivery. We don't want to turn back to our audience. The other thing is, what does it do to the volume of my voice when I turn to face the whiteboard? You can't hear me nearly as well. And so it's important that you are keeping with the idea of not using the whiteboard. If you are using the whiteboard, unfortunately, we have a smart board here, so you can't write on this. And the only way that writing on a whiteboard becomes effective goes along with number 4. So let's skip to number 4. Display visual aids only when discussing them. As it says here, for the photo speech, you will keep the photo up from the time you reveal it to the end. So right there at the introduction until the end of this speech. But for other parts of speeches that you will be giving in your life or in this class, informative and persuasive speaking, you are only revealing the visual aid when you talk about it. So let's say I'm talking about, well, I think you get it. I don't really need to describe it in full detail. But since we should only talk about our visual aids or reveal them when we're talking about them, if I had something written on the whiteboard, everybody would be able to see it, right? So the only way would be if we could pull down a screen and then reveal what we were talking about. So if you do want to write something on the whiteboard, you can bring in a poster board to cover it up and then reveal it if you would like to, or write it on a poster board and then turn it over, something like that. But I think that effectively you could do it very easily by creating a Word document with that same language and then just showing it on the projector. Does that make sense to you all? When you are not talking about your visual aid, what should it look like behind you? Nothing. And as you will see on the technology portion that I gave you, right now there's the dock camera is on, it's on there, but there is a button called Pick Mute, and that creates the black screen. That when I'm ready to reveal my picture, all I have to do is go over and hit the device that I want to use. Does that make sense to you? And then once I'm done talking about it, what do I hit again?
The black screen.
Click Pick Mute. And once it makes the red, you'll know that it's in action. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes. Okay, great.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
You said it's the smart board, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I assume those colors you could write with those or not?
You can if you know how to do it. This is also, I tried to use it in my last class, it's off calibration, which means that if I push here, because this is where the button is, the cursor is actually over here because it's so off. It's not calibrated correctly. So if you know how to use this and you know how to write on it and you're really great at it, go for it. Use that smart board and show us all what you're made of. If
Looks
not,
like fun.
this may not be the time to try it out. Especially if I have to do a 7-minute speech. Display visual aids where listeners can see them. Again, if you have an object, I would suggest putting it under the projector. If you have a picture, put it under the projector. Make sure that it's large enough for everybody to see. So if I hold up something like this and assume, or I'm like, oh, I didn't bring one, so I'll just hold it here today. Is this helpful? Can everybody see this? No. Make sure that you are doing that. Talk to your audience, not your visual aid. This is such an important quality in speaking. Your visual aid is going to be up there the entire time for your photograph speech. Do you know what people are going to want to look at? That visual aid. How are you going to keep their attention?
Hello, turn it off, close it, hide it.
You can't turn it off in this one. How are you going to do it?
Speak louder.
Refer to it.
Okay, good. Maybe we refer to it. Maybe we speak louder. The worst thing that somebody can do is to sit and talk to a visual aid the entire time. So as you can see, it says, excuse me, and there are 2 hearts here, and there's a girl here. No, we don't need to do that. We can Vanna White it, right? So what does Vanna Whiting it mean? Ah, yes, okay, as you can see, and of course I can see where I'm looking and I can point to it, but I don't have to sit and stare at it and talk to it the whole time. There's a fine balance between that, and you should know when to look and when not to look. If you are delivering your speech from the podium and you want to move this here so that you are not in the light and you're not blocking the visual aid, that is fine to do so that you can be closer to it. But if you are using the speaker's pyramid, during particular parts, feel free to step back, show what we're talking about, and come back out. Then if you have something to do, you can come back out again. But the thing that's going to keep you most excited and most engaged about this speech and what I have to say about it is instead using your what? Your voice and your body and your delivery and your face. It is going to be so important that when you have a visual aid in front of you to, again, not let that co-star be the shining star. You need to stay the shining star. And in order to do that, we oftentimes will have to, yes, raise our hands a little bit, or we will have to use our face a little bit more, or our volume, just to make sure that people are looking. If I see that everybody's looking at the visual aid, I can make a big swipe and bring us all back in. There's different things that you can do.
Can you stand in front of your visual aid until you're referring to it, or do you have
Like
to
this?
show it? No, just walking in front of it. You have to let it.
Let it be.
Okay.
Let it be. Let it be the whole time. But even if I was delivering here and I said, this photograph that is used at my cousin's art program is something that has been used to build community over much time. The information that I will read to you in 5 minutes or something like that will help to illustrate that a bit more. But right now, I want you to think about and take a second to think about the amazing things that happen to you as a woman and in your everyday life. Who knows? But at least I'm using hand gestures and big things, and I'm letting you know that I'll point out the areas for you to pay attention to in a bit. Does this make sense? Some of you may have photographs that don't reveal anything about what you're going to talk about. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the photograph speech. So it will be your job the entire time to keep the audience drawn in and let them know what you want them to concentrate on. Talk to your audience, not your visual aid. We talked about that. The other thing that we want to note is that when we are walking, we should always make contact with the audience. I showed you making contact with the audience by walking in this way. When I walked to my visual aid, or when I was walking in the speaker's triangle, did you see me do this? No. What did I do?
You kept eye contact.
I walked, I didn't have to do like a jazz walk or anything, but in turn I walked sideways and I kept in contact with you. The same thing should happen if you're walking from the podium to the visual aid stand. Will you follow me with that computer?
Oh.
If I'm walking, I want to make sure that I am walking and I am still connected with all of you. And the most important thing with this walking, when we're going to the visual aid, is that you continue to do what we call a walk and talk. What's a walk and talk? Well, there's nothing worse than this. Let me show you my visual aid. As you can see, now what is that dead time giving us all an opportunity to do? Get distracted, look at something else. It's also quiet, it's awkward. You are also timed in this speech, so use that time. Start to describe it, because if you put a visual aid up, as it says, number 6, you need to explain it clearly and concisely. This makes sense to me because I know what my speech is about. This visual aid, especially a graph or a chart, may make no sense to you because you don't know how to read it, you don't know what it's in relation to, what are you trying to show me, what am I supposed to look at, who knows. So if a visual aid goes up and we can't read the font, tell us what it says. If we don't see what the artist wanted to communicate, you can explain that when you're describing your visual aid. So what you could say is something as clearly, I'm going to pull up a visual aid for you right now that's going to show some of the damaging and destructive effects of global warming on the polar ice caps. As you can see here from this photograph that was taken from National Geographic in 2010, the water rising is a representative of, right? And now I've walked you through it, I've prefaced it, and I've walked you back. And I haven't lost connection with any of you, and we've kept it going and flowing. Does that make sense, the walk and talk? Okay, good. So explain it clearly and concisely, and then finally practice with your visual aid. All of you will have a space where your visual aid fits in, but we often do not take into account the time it takes to go over, to set up the visual aid, to put it in front of us, to do whatever we need to do. It is important that you practice with it, or at least practice the idea of walking over. Put that into your body. Pretend like you're clicking on yes or no. Walk back over. Do it again. So that you know how much time is being spent doing that, and that you know that flow for your own sanity of space and using it. And if you can mimic something similar to what this classroom environment is, or any speaking environment, it's going to help you to feel more confident as well. Does this make sense in regards to visual aids and how to use them? Ideally, we want to keep connected with the audience. We never want to turn to face our visual aid unless we can do so quickly to explain what we're talking about. We want to make sure that everybody can see our visual aids and that they're large enough. We want to describe clearly and concisely exactly what they're there for, what their purpose is. Remember, don't flag me with Cuba, or Cuba flag me. Make sure that you are relating to it and making sense of it, that you show how it fits into your purpose of speaking all together, and make sure that you practice with that visual aid as much as possible. If you are using anything that is graphic, such as violent material, sexual material, nudity, these are fine when they have a purpose, when they serve a purpose for your audience and for your speech. It is not fine when it's brought in and used out of context or for shock value or to make a laugh or a joke. It's also not appropriate to not let your audience know that you have some kind of explicit material. My speech is going to reveal some explicit sexual content that may be hard for anybody who has had abuse in their life. I want everybody to know that up front, and you are more than welcome to take this time to leave the classroom, or I will also let you know when that content is coming up, and I will give you an opportunity to close your eyes so that you do not need to be exposed to that. Does that make sense? It's just a kind thing to do for individuals who may have triggers towards this type of violent imagery. The other problem with images these days, as you know, from being a subject to the internet, is that once you see something, you can never what? Not see it. You Google something and something pops up and you're like, ugh, I just wanted spoons, and now I have this, and now I can't unsee that forever. That's why kids are with things. Okay. Any other questions about your visual aids? What I want you to know is that there is, we're going to